Okay, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting. This is of the Cobb County Board of Elections, this May 9th, 2022. Our chair will be with us shortly, but in the meantime, I'm Jessica Brooks, and I am the vice chairperson for the Board of Elections. So I'd like to begin with our public comment and follow our agenda. There's a 5-minute limit per speaker, and I understand that we have one person who will be joining us remotely for public comment, and then we also have 3 in-person public commenters. So can we begin with the online commenter?
Do you have that person's name?
Jelly, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. And could you give us your name? Could you repeat out your name so that we can all make sure that we have it?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shelly Northrup, and I live and work in Smyrna. And I wanted to first thank the Cobb County Board of Elections and staff for all their hard work that you all have been doing on behalf of the voters, especially this year. Second, I wanted to encourage the board to continue preparing for increases in early voting and vote by mail, and to ensure that all early voting locations have the resources they need to keep the lines down. Cobb County has in the past had an election day precinct that had more voters than the state average. So I ask that the board continue supporting their poll managers and poll workers to ensure a smooth election day operation. Thank you, board, for your time.
Okay, thank you so much. In the absence of an additional remote commenter, I want to start the list of those who've signed up for today. And thank you, Ms. Northup, for your comments. The first person who's signed up for today is Pam Reardon.
Thank you so much. My name is Pam Reardon, and I also want to reiterate my thanks to all the staff of the Cobb Board of Elections, all the poll workers. They are doing a great job, and I want to, on the point of, I'm not sure where I see the increase and the lines. There are 10 locations to early vote, which I think are too many. We are wasting resources. I've been around to the different polls, and there's a particular one that when I was there on Friday, only 135 people had voted for the whole week. So we are paying people to stay at those polls. Nobody's coming to vote when we could probably combine and not have so many locations. I'm very concerned about the money we're wasting, and also because we're going to have a primary runoff. So that's one of my big concerns. Of course, another big concern was the kerfuffle that happened with the data and the poll pads when we started. And I know that's not this Cobb County's fault. And I know that they're understaffed with respect to testing that data. But that is just a big concern. And then, of course, again, on Thursday, when there was no data available anywhere in the whole state, and that obviously is not your fault, but it's just another thing to add to why people are just not feeling secure about whether their vote counts, number one, when they get a wrong ballot, and then they don't know that they have to check the ballot. They're just used to, having and putting faith into the system. So those are a couple of my concerns, or maybe 3 of my concerns. I just think that we're spending way too much money and having too many advanced polling, and of course we have way too many days, but of course that's the legislature, not you. But you did decide to have all of these added locations, which I am totally thinking is a waste of time, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Reardon, for your comments. Our next public commenter is Boyd Parks.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for this opportunity. Like Ms. Reardon said, I want to thank the the Voter Election Board and the Office of Elections for running efficient operations. If you've seen any of my email, I have what I call a truism in the signature section, just to quote, ignoring evidence of election fraud because the election is already over is like ignoring a murder because the victim is already dead. I'm Boyd Parks from Ackworth. Last Thursday, I was a poll watcher at North Cobb Senior Center and witnessed an efficient and well-run election managed by two veteran and seasoned poll managers. I'll be back at the same location tomorrow and pray that things will go as well then as they did a week ago. In the meantime, however, I was dismayed to learn that there were serious problems last week across the county and the state. When poll pad check-in systems are down, lines back up, and workarounds are employed that cause problems. In the system outage, the system outage was statewide, this is not any issue caused by Cobb County, but rather by a Secretary of State's issue that caused issues in Cobb and undoubtedly in all other 158 counties. Admittedly, many voters do not know their precinct, so when they're given a ballot with the wrong precinct, that ballot cannot accurately reflect their issues or candidates. Having ballots printed for each voter when they check in at the polling place would overcome these issues. Then the voter could simply mark the secure recountable record of their choices. This would remove much of the smoke and mirrors from the current processes. I witnessed the overhead and the numerous points of potential failure as I followed the staff around as they secured the complex equipment at the end of the day. With the systems such as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, who knows what may have been connected to what? We do know that the 6 poll pad stations had to be connected to the internet, so any or all of the BMDs and scanners may have also been connected, regardless of the numbers of bright red seals that perhaps are more for show than actual secure elections. I'm not casting stones at Cobb County as they did not cause these issues or choose these systems. I'm sorry that I sound like a skeptic, but I viewed the well-done documentary 2,000 Mules last week, and I have seen much more solid evidence of election fraud across the country. We must work toward more election integrity to save our nation. Fewer days of voting would be another way to avoid stressing the poll workers and poll watchers. As Ms. Reardon said, very few voters at North Cobb Christian Center. On Monday, there were only about 100, and on Tuesday, there were 215. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Parks, for coming today. Our final public commenter in person is Kent, and I apologize for not being able to pronounce it or really understand, but I'll ask you to pronounce your name for us. And thank you for coming.
Good afternoon. My name is Kent Bice. And B-U-I-S, how we got Bice out of that, I blame some ancestor when they probably came to this country. And I wanted to also thank the Cobb County Board of Elections and their staff for working long hours on behalf of voters. I would encourage you to continue to prepare for increases in early voting and vote by mail. I think we need to promote the vote and promote voters. If we're having not enough attendance, or the long lines is a trade-off between long lines and easy access to votes for people that may have to travel by a bus or Uber or get a ride from somebody. Because Cobb County election has precincts with more than the average number of state voters, I trust you will continue to encourage the vote and support the poll managers and poll workers. I voted this afternoon and was able to vote smoothly and swiftly, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to defer to my colleague, our chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, and my apologies to everyone for my tardiness. Atlanta traffic was not cooperating this morning or this afternoon, but I am here now, and we will continue with the agenda as provided and as published. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I apologize. When you made reference to individuals, there's no one online to comment.
We began with.
We began with them. Got it. Just want to double check. So we'll move on with the approval of the minutes, starting with the April 11th meeting. I presume everyone has had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes. And is there any comment and/or proposed revisions? Yes,
I move
Mr.
we
Bruning.
approve the April 11th meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to approve our April 11th meeting minutes. All those in favor, if you'll denote as much. Unanimously approved. Moving on to our May 9th, 2022 meeting minutes, which are obviously brief. But if there are any comments, please let that know, and if not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve the May 9th, 2022 minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to approve our May 9th meeting minutes. All those in favor, please denote as much. Excellent, thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, just to confirm, there is, it's noted no public hearing, so we'll move on to the Director of Elections, Ms. Eveler, your report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. I also wanted to note that I got a text from Mr. Gartland at 3:05. He said he's about 20 minutes away.
Okay, thank you for
In case
letting
he's
us know.
able to come. Okay, so you have before you the election summary report, which is the tabulation. I didn't give those to you, sorry, CP. You want to? Yeah. I think did everybody in the audience have one? Yes. No, okay, we had some extras. Norma, do you have a couple of extras? You can give one, we can put it on the screen. Thank you. Okay, so that's the election summary report, comes from the election management system and is the official tabulation. So we'll get that up on the screen. And so you can see that we had a total vote cast of 4,882 ballots cast in the May 3rd special election runoff. And in our county, of course, this was a state district race, so there were districts in Fulton County, but in our county, these are the results. There will be a result on the Secretary of State's website for the actual results of this race. Okay, and that ended up being a 13.21% turnout in Cobb County. We also have, did you give them this other one too? Sorry. We also have our report from election night, which we'll get up on the screen as well. These are just some data points that we keep track of for every election, so we can, look at time after time how we're projecting the time that we will be finished for the evening and our turnout. So the report from election night has the first precinct coming in at 8:24 and the last precinct at 10:02. We did have early and advanced voting tabulated and uploaded by 7:06 and the mail by 7:24. And again, the turnout was 13.21%. We keep track of our provisional ballots. In this case, we had issued 10 provisional ballots at the polls and counted 9 of those. And then we have stats regarding absentee mail and advance voting, regarding how many were issued and how many were received by Election Day and counted. And then we did have one that was cured after Election Day and was counted. So the total of those two categories was 1,463 counted. Okay, so those are the documents that I have for you to look at, but I also wanted to, if you can take these down, CP. I also wanted to talk about the issue that we had on the morning of May 3rd, where we were not able to bring the equipment up immediately. Sorry, put that one down for a moment. This is for another one. Thank you. Okay. So this one was on Tuesday, May 3rd. We had an issue where, no excuses, but we do have a lot of new people, and so they were not aware that in this case we had another database change. So we have talked about the database change relative to the May 24th primary, but we also had another database change with this election where we received we did all of our testing, and upon the upload of the test data, we found that we couldn't report out of that database. So it had to go back to the Secretary of State's office to do corrections, and then we had to start testing over. And at that point, we create the election media again, which is the keys back basically to the election equipment that starts the equipment up. And it is a security measure that you can't start the equipment with old election media. You can't use an old key to start the equipment, and that is part of the security of the system. And so our staff, unfortunately, had not done this enough to know that you had to swap out the new keys for the old keys that were already packed at this point. It was quite late in the process. And so the poll workers received the old keys for the equipment and weren't able to use that to open the voting system, and that would be for the scanner and for the ballot marking devices. So luckily, our emergency procedures worked perfectly, and they started voting paper ballots immediately at 7 o'clock. And so we realized what the problem was almost immediately when they were calling at shortly after 6. And so we re-encoded new election media, which would be the cards, what we call the poll worker cards, and the I buttons that starts the scanner. And we sent out 12 staff members to 12 different polls. And they had the new election media by, shortly after, I think it was about 8 o'clock. And so we really had very few emergency ballots that were cast. Of course, this was a low turnout election, but the polls opened on time. It was just that they were using emergency ballots. So that was really the issue with this one. It was an unfortunate error, but it was definitely, the emergency procedures did work. So I would entertain any questions that the board has, but otherwise I would ask that you certify this election.
Does anyone have any questions?
I just have a question. I think it's going to be an ongoing question about categories of provisional ballots and why there was a need to cast them.
Why there was a need to cast
The
provisional
provision,
ballots?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
so I didn't get the breakdown on the 10 that were cast and what the reason was. Generally speaking, of course, we have the out of precincts that we are going to see from probably this time forward. And we have provisional where there's a question about eligibility. And then we have ones related to ID where the person arrived at the polls without ID. Those are the main categories.
So, Ms. Avalar, I do have a question, just for my edification and perhaps edification of those in the, that have joined us this afternoon. Can you just provide some clarity, some additional context around, quote, new media? Specifically, I think it's extremely important, given some of the concerns that have been raised from time to time. If you could just share with us what is on quote new media or on that card, just so that we're all on the same page.
Certainly. So the election media is the database, and it is downloaded onto what we call the I button, so that it can open the scanner that has those memory cards. So if the memory cards were created from a database, then an I button that wasn't matched up to that couldn't open that equipment. The same thing with the poll worker card, which is an orange card, similar to the cards that the voters use to make the ballot marking device go. There's a poll worker card that can be used to initialize that ballot marking device to make it start working and understand the database that it has on it. If you use a poll worker card that isn't set up for that election, it won't start the ballot marking device.
Okay. And so effectively, it includes the new or the correct database. There are no cast votes on it or anything along those lines. It is a database that has a list of voters in it, correct?
The database doesn't have a list of voters. The
Okay.
database is the structure of the election.
Election, okay.
Right, and so it's all the precinct and combos and the ballot styles that go with that.
Right.
For each particular combo, they have certain identifiers for a precinct and for the districts that are in that combination.
Okay.
So it's that structure of the database.
So it's the structure of the database, but again, to the extent that you had one individual go to each of the 12 locations with this new media, it doesn't contain cast votes. It contains information that informs basically getting things started in each of the polling locations, correct?
Yes, ma'am. It's before any votes are cast, it's
Right.
just to start the equipment. It's like the keys to the car.
Got it. Okay,
And so
perfect.
your keys don't work in Mr. Bruning's car, hopefully.
He has a much nicer car than me. Okay. Anyone else have questions? Okay, thank you. I appreciate your entertaining the questions. And with that, I believe we will entertain a motion with respect to the certification of the election for the special election runoff held on May the 3rd.
I have one last question.
Oh, I apologize.
Oh, you already.
No, he was ready to move because I'd inquired about questions, so
Okay,
go right ahead.
the last question that I had is about the special election, and again, the information that we have is only Cobb information, but just for general information about that special election. How many precincts were involved in Fulton?
There were 2 precincts in Fulton, so we did have the majority of precincts.
Okay.
Are there any further questions? Mr. Bruning, I believe you were about to make a motion.
I move that we certify the results as presented for the May 3rd primary, or the May 3rd special election runoff.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to certify the election results from the May 3rd special election runoff. If you are in favor of doing so, please indicate as much. It's unanimous. Okay. Ms. Evelyn, you're next.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
On the second bullet, on election night, May 24th at 7 o'clock, this board will observe the election results as they come in, and we will be doing that at 2 of our locations, both our West Park, Whitlock Avenue location, and the election warehouse. So we just need to see who would be assigned to each location.
Are there preferences? I'm fine with whatever. Okay.
You need 3 and 2.
3 and 2.
Yes.
I'll go to 5 cents.
Okay. I'm happy to go to the prep center.
Okay. Mr. Gartland and Mr. Brunning and Ms. Brooks will go.
We'll be
then
at West
to
Park.
West Park, okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, and the next item is to review the advanced voting schedule for the primary runoff June 21, 2022. And if CP, you can put that one up for me. There it goes. Okay, so these are the proposed locations and dates and times for the June 21 runoff. It's basically the same places and hours of the day as the primary. However, we did not get a reservation at the Boots Ward Rec Center. They are having programming for summer programs, and we're not able to accommodate us. And we believe that we can start the early voting on June 8th, pending the completion of testing, but that's our projected date.
Could you repeat that, please?
And June 8th, it's actually, I think, a Wednesday.
The location that you said we were not able to secure, what does that do with regard to coverage across the entire county of Cobb?
We do have a map that we can put up there.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, so the yellow dots are all of the locations, and this was actually the map from May 24th, but we just put a circle and an X over the West Cobb Boots Ward Rec Center.
Okay. Are there potentially, I mean, there seems to be a pretty significant gap there. Any other potential opportunities to identify?
We were not able to identify anything else close by. Our other one that we've used in that location is the Ron Anderson Rec Building, and that also is having summer programs.
Summer programming, okay. All right. Does anyone else have any questions for Ms. Heffler with respect to the in-person advanced voting options for the June 21 runoff? Yes.
Is there a way to make sure that there's signage there that says no early voting, so that people know, or like what the closest location would be? Because if we had it during, since we're having it now, right? Basically making sure that people who might show up there say, okay, well, here's the next closest location. I
Yes.
get that it's not available, there's nothing we can do about that, but perhaps if somebody shows up there thinking, okay, I voted here early during
Right.
the primary early voting, I'm gonna go back there for the runoff. If we had some kind of signage, that'd be great.
We certainly can do that. And just one more comment about the dispersion of locations. There is one location still in the proposed Lost Mountain City and one that is in the proposed East Cobb City. So they have an equal number of voting locations in their area. Vining's proposed city does not have a location, but it is close to the Smyrna location.
Okay.
I have one comment or one question about the June 8th through 10th period. I think, didn't we in this runoff start on Saturday and instead of Wednesday?
Yes, we did, but we believe we can be ready by that Wednesday instead. So that would be 3 extra days.
Well, I haven't been the advocate of consistency, but other members have, and I wonder if our plan or our schedule being starting on the Saturday and running the full next week like we did in this past runoff is a good schedule. I mean, to me, 2 extra days, Wednesday and or a Thursday and Friday, I don't know if it's worth it. Or that's what I'm questioning. In other words, do we really need June 8th and 9th, or?
And 10th. Because you would be proposing to begin on June the 11th?
No, June the 10th. Oh, I'm sorry, June 11th, Saturday. I mean, we need to have a Saturday as part of the period for those that can only get to the poll on a Saturday. But the time before that just seems, actually, June 8th, is June 8th? It's actually Wednesday
through Friday.
Not Monday through Friday. So I'm questioning whether the Thursday and Friday are worth doing, or if we would be better off to start on Saturday and, continue through the next week. More for consistency than in runoffs than anything else. Or I would suggest that.
Okay, so this says June 8th through 10th, Monday through Friday.
It should note Wednesday
But
through
it should,
Friday.
it
Yes.
should be Wednesday.
Yes, we'll change that. Can you flip back to the other flyer?
And Steve,
Yeah, thank you.
you're thinking it should just be the Thursday and Friday? Is
No,
that-
I'm thinking it should not be the Thursday, Friday, just be the Saturday. Start on Saturday and then run through the whole next week. So from June 11th to June 17th.
Oh, basically, which is what we you're saying that's what we gave for this House District 45 special runoff?
Correct. I get worried about us getting in too big a hurry to try to get everything open
Yeah,
and not having properly tested. And just seems like the 2 extra days would be beneficial. And I guess I would ask Ms. Evler what she thinks about that.
Well-
Janine, before you
Yeah.
answer that, I think, I've run into so many voters who are under the impression that 202 required us to have 2 Saturdays, so that's kind of bundled in with the question about,
Yes,
the
so
days.
SB 202 does require 2 Saturdays and 3 weeks for regular elections, but for runoffs, it says as soon as possible,
okay.
with the minimum being the Monday prior, the second Monday prior to the election, which would be starting on that June 13th date. So we did want to add a Saturday, as we usually like to do. And this being the primary runoff, we were concerned about the number of people who may be voting this time. And I appreciate the board's desire to be consistent, but it's actually been our practice to modify based on the type of election and the projected heavier turnout. We try to offer more, and then the lighter turnouts, we offer less. So this is one that we were projecting that would be probably very well attended, and that we might need a few extra days.
So that addresses Mr. Bruning's question with respect to consistency with regard, and I don't mean to speak for you, Mr. Bruning, but you also raised a question with regard to readiness. So if you'll just address any concerns around readiness.
Right, we believe that we can be ready and tested by the June 8th date. It's possible that we would run into difficulties, and at that point, we would have to delay the start of early voting. But without advertising it at this
In
point,
advance.
we can't just add more days.
But we can cut.
I would like to not have to cut, but yes.
I would just tend to agree. I think since this is a primary runoff, we're going to see a higher turnout. So I think that the extra days could be beneficial if you feel like that's, I mean, you're putting it on here, so I assume that means that you think you're ready to go at that point. And if these places have agreed to it, these 9 locations, and you feel like that's that's something that's doable by the staff, I think that it would make sense in light of what we're looking at for potential turnout. It is a big ballot this time around, as opposed to one thing with lots of contested positions, so.
I'd like to just apologize to the board. VA kept me, and they had the doctors talk to me that tell me that I'm getting old, but otherwise.
But hopefully in good health notwithstanding.
Yeah, for a 102-year-old man, I'm in good shape, so I apologize.
And no worries, I guess I'm in good company, Mr. Gartland, because I was late as well. Anything further with respect to the proposed advanced voting options for the June 21 runoff?
I guess hearing Ms. Evler express confidence that we can be ready by June the 8th, and the concern of other board members with volume, I would support sticking with the schedule as we have it.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anything further? Go ahead.
Okay, I just think we should shorten some of these times. I'm more in agreement of that. It seems like going around to all the different polls, a lot of them were just sitting there. They just, someday, if it's the first couple of days, and they said, hey, we could cut this short, we could save some money. And I think we should cut it some.
So, Mr. Garland, are you referring to cutting the days or cutting the hours on the days that are noted?
Well, I'd like to cut the days, but if you want to cut the hours, I'm with you. No, I think the people are used to the hours.
Hours, yeah, that's what I was
You
gonna
know.
say. I would be opposed to cutting the hours because I do believe, to the earlier point about consistency, just making certain that we're consistent in the times that we're open. Admittedly, because of the proposed or the potential higher voter turnout, I personally am not in favor of cutting the days. But again, entertain any further comments or commentary around this.
I make a motion that we approve the advanced voting schedule as listed on the brochure, opening June 8th and closing on June 17th.
And including the edit for the.
Yes.
Yeah, right,
the
Wednesday.
Wednesday through Friday.
Are you gonna go Wednesday, or are you gonna leave it just Monday?
Yeah.
Let's cut it some more then.
Well, if that's the perceived cut. No, the dates as noted are June 8th through the 10th,
Yeah, I see.
Wednesday through Friday, June 11th, which is that Saturday, and then the following week, June 13th through
Monday
17th.
through Friday, and I thought, wow.
Right. I think we all did that. Okay. It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and properly seconded to approve the in-person advanced voting options as noted with one minor edit to correct the reference from Monday to Wednesday. All those in favor of this proposed voting plan? Okay. You noted, Mr. Gartland voted in the negative. Okay. Alrighty, with that, this is approved. Thank you, Ms. Evler.
Chairwoman, I know you had asked offline about the issue on Monday with early voting, and so I did prepare a few slides to share with the board. It's okay if I do that now?
Yes, and then when you say offline, it was a phone call to, from me to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, CP, if you can put that PowerPoint up. I'm going to try and explain about the data issue with the poll pads. For the first day of early voting for the 24th, May 24th primary, we had a late change in our database. And what happened was we found that there were 2 precinct combinations that were found late in the review and were not in the old database. So I have here a very simplistic view to kind of show what happens with this. And what eventually happened was the poll pads remained with the old database and were deployed out to the early voting locations. And all of the other equipment, the ballot marking device and the scanner, had been updated with the new database. So if you look at the left side with the old database, these are some fictitious, obviously, precinct and combos that were in the old database. And for every combination, precinct and combination of districts, which is what we call a district combo, there is a code on the poll pad that says, this is how I identify this ballot to bring up. So when a person comes in to vote, if they are in, say, precinct P, combo 1, then you are supposed to be able to encode the card in the poll pad. It encodes code 1. you bring that over to the ballot marking device, you insert that card, it reads that code 1 is the ballot for precinct P combo 1. What happened with this change is that we had inserted 2 different precinct combos that, again, were not found initially during redistricting and were late in the process. We didn't really have a lot of time to do quality assurance from the redistricting effort. If we had had, enough time, we believe we would have found those earlier in the process, and the database would have been created with that information to start with. But because we found these 2 precinct combos that were necessary so that these people would have a ballot, we had to do a database change. And what happens when you add a 1 or 2 or 3 combos, which is what is shown over on the right, is that the existing ones move down in the list. It goes alphabetically. And what we did in real life is we had a combo in Oregon 03 and a combination in Sandy Plains 01. So everything above Oregon 03, alphabetized, was not changed. But everything below Oregon 03, including Oregon 03, and part of it anyway, had moved down. And so the numbers, which is the codes, are now different for, say, precinct P combo 1. It's now code 4. And so if the poll pad encodes a 1 on that card and the voter goes over to the BMD, 1 now means precinct O combo 7. And so that's what the difference is and what we were seeing. So CP, if you go to the next slide, or the next, that's fine, go back a minute. I think this actually displays what I talked about. So you choose precinct P combo 1, it's coded as 1 on the card, which now means precinct O combo 7, and you really should have wanted the 4 on your card. That's what precinct P combo 1. So in the perfect world, the poll pad would have been downloaded with the new database, and it would have had 4 instead of 1. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is more of a real-life sample of what we have in our database. And the old database, for instance, for Soap Creek 01, the Democratic ballot with combination 811. Each combo has a 3-digit code that's just telling us it means, say, Congress 14. Well, it wouldn't be it would be Congress maybe 6. Senate 32, House 33, whatever the districts are in 811, they're unique to 811. So in this case, the code 1462 meant 811 Soap Creek 1 Democratic ballot. But 1462 on the BMD and in the new database meant Smyrna 7A Democratic ballot 898. Smyrna and Soap Creek are nowhere near each other. They're not going to have the same districts. So a person who was at the poll inserting that voter access card and getting a Smyrna 7A ballot, may not have noticed at the top it said Smyrna 7A, but they would have noticed that the districts were different. Or in some cases, and the most obvious case, that there was or wasn't a cityhood issue on that ballot. And the proposed cityhood issues were so obvious that they became the talking point about the ballots and this problem, but it really was bigger than that. These codes being changed and the new database created a lot of wrong districts in the first day of early voting. So in this case, instead of 1462 in the new database, it was 1472 to get that correct ballot. And that's where that was the mistake coming through. We'll go to the next one. So this was the timeline as best as I could recreate it. Things were going okay from 7 to 8. We weren't really hearing anything. Around 8 to 8:30, we started receiving calls from voters and from the poll workers saying that the cityhood question was missing from the ballot. But like I said, in reality, it was bigger than that. It was wrong districts as well were on the ballots. At 8:20, we sent an email to the poll managers that any cityhood issues should result in a call to the office, because we thought there's a question from voters about whether they're in the city or not, and we could resolve that. Then we realized as it continued that what the database issue was likely the problem. And so at 8:45, we just decided that had to be it. And at 8:50, we sent our first email to the poll managers in the early voting locations with our plan to use the ballot activation codes. So the ballot activation codes would be a listing of all the codes in the new database and the ballot that it goes to. So they would manually find the district combo and the precinct and the type of ballot party-wise that they want and go to the list, find that correct code, which would, in the case of that slide before, 1472, and they would manually insert that into the BMD to bring up the correct ballot. So that was our first email to the poll managers with the tools to do this. At 9:30, we sent a follow-up email to make sure it was still happening with some more detailed instructions. And from 9:30 to 10, we were making phone calls to each poll manager to say, did you get it? Do you understand it? And then I originally thought that by 10:30, we probably would be okay with saying everybody was in place doing that. But at 10:35, we actually were getting to an assistant manager who was filling in for the poll managers. So they had not received anything as far as communications at the Smyrna location because their poll manager actually had a family emergency and there were assistants that were functioning as poll manager. So I had to bump down my time estimate that I told the board earlier. And what I'm looking at now is that by at least 11 o'clock, we had everybody using ballot activation codes and manually bringing up ballots. Now that process was much slower than just having voters get their own card because we only send 2 of the poll worker cards that initiate this to each voting location. So I'm sure it was a lot slower. And I know that some of the poll workers were telling people as they came that, you know, we're having to use a manual process. It's going to be a lot slower. And I'm aware that some people left, you know, to not vote and to vote another day. So I think I have one more, if you'll go forward. No, a couple more. Okay. So the impact of all of this, as best that I could come up with, there were a total of 1,995 voters on that day. And of those, there were 546 that were in precincts Oregon 03 to Willio 01. And as I said earlier, everything above that alphabetically was the same code. And so the poll pad functioned correctly for that. And so the poll workers were instructed that anybody that was in a precinct in the latter half of the latter part of the alphabet would use the ballot activation codes. But 546 was the total that was in that group in those precincts. Of those, there were 157 that voted from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m., which is the time frame that I believe the poll pad was used and could have brought up incorrect ballots. One more. So of those 157 ballots cast in that morning time frame, I went through each one and calculated out the old code and the ballot that it would have brought up if it was used in the poll and the voter actually voted it. What was the effect of that? And as you can see, this is what I came up with. There were 56 that would have potentially gotten the wrong congressional district, 70 for state senate, 89 state house, 42 commission, 40 school. There were 2 that had the Ward 2 Smyrna race missing, but 3 that had added it. There was 10 with the Lost Mountain question missing and 4 added that shouldn't have had the Lost Mountain issue. East Cobb, this was interesting. There were 7 that had the East Cobb question, and they should have had the Lost Mountain question. Again, these are the most it could have been, I believe. So it may be that in some of these, the voters actually got the ballot activation codes and got the correct ballot. But I'm looking at the entire realm of 157 ballots in that time frame. Then there was East Cobb missing, East Cobb added, and Vinings added. There were no scenarios where Vinings was missing.
So, for the 24th?
Can you turn your microphone on? Sorry.
Okay, so the 24th, we're ready?
Well, we're going to be ready, but this was an issue that only takes place
Because of the
in
change
early
of the-
voting.
Okay.
Okay, this is only an early voting scenario. Let me just take a minute to explain the use of poll pads in early voting is different than the way they're used on election day. On early voting, the poll workers use the computer system, the voter registration system, that is connected to the same one we use in the main office. And they are hardwired, or they go through Wi-Fi, and they are real-time looking up that person's record and marking that they've been issued an absentee ballot in person. And then to create the card, to give them that ballot on the ballot marking device, they go to the poll pad. Since the laptop computer can't create a card, they go to the poll pad and they have a listing of precincts and combos. They don't have names on there at all. So they just find the precinct combo, insert the card, and create the card from that. So the poll worker does have to translate information from the laptop into the poll pad to get the card. So there are always some clerical errors in that transaction because you're putting a human between this apparatus and that apparatus. But obviously this was a different problem. This was a mechanical problem or software problem where the poll pad didn't have the correct activation codes in it for that database. So it was creating cards that weren't the correct ballot. But what we did on that, just to finish the story, is they were using ballot activation codes, manually inserting their poll worker card and bringing up the ballot for each voter that was in Oregon 03 through Willie 01, I believe from 11 a.m. to the rest of that day. And then at that evening, we brought new poll pads that we had downloaded the correct database to them and swapped out with a whole nother set of poll pads that had the correct database. So they started with those on Tuesday morning. So as far as the impact of this error, I believe that this is the total universe of problems that it could have resulted in. You know, like I said, there may be some between 10:30 and 11 that actually these didn't happen because they had already started using it at some locations. So this would be the greatest number of impacts.
So of the 157 ballots out of 1995 that day,
Yes.
do we have the 1995 ballots somehow physically separated? I mean, are they isolated?
Yes, at the end of every day of early voting, the ballots are sealed and brought back to the main office.
I see.
So that day's ballots, the 1995, are sealed in their own container.
Right. So what can this board do about this? I mean, is there anything that we can do according to the code? I actually have been trying to read through this all morning, and it's tough. And I can't find anything in here that tells us what a board should do. in this situation where we have votes that we know are, we think are erroneous. And do we have any leeway?
Well, our attorney didn't come today, but in my experience, you would wait and see what the margins are after all voting has completed. And if the margin is within these numbers, then we probably have a challenge that a judge has to determine.
When will we see that? When will we see that?
At the end of all voting to see what the winner is. Yeah.
Kind of late then. Well, I would at least like to get the attorneys to give us some advice on what, if anything, the board can do about this kind of situation. You know, I don't find anything in the code, not that I'm an expert, that tells us what should be done. And I don't know if we can ask the State Board of Elections for direction.
I think this is a better board, but
Well, certainly that's true. But, you know, it's like, you've got 500 pages of stuff here, very dense stuff that doesn't tell you when you have a mistake, how to remedy that mistake.
the computer especially here.
Well, that's right. I mean, this is even not a
They got to read.
accidental. I mean, it's a vendor dropped the ball, or Secretary of State didn't advise the vendor. You know, it doesn't matter what the actual chain of events was. But now we're stuck with it. It's
This is
after
a
the fact.
real life scenario.
That's right.
Bottom line.
That's right.
And like you just said, we had to go through it before, we knew what was going to happen.
So I would certainly think that we should be advised by our attorney what, if anything, that is allowed to be done in the code. And then if there is no direction in the code, should we ask the State Board of Elections how to handle this? I mean, as long as we have 1,995 ballots sequestered, and we know where the problems are. We just don't know out of that 1,995, which are the problem ballots. There's no way to determine that. But I would think we would at least ask that question of the attorney and of the State Election Board if it's not clear in the code.
Mr. White is aware of the issue, Daniel White,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And has he, to date, I know he was aware of the issue, to date, has he provided any guidance?
Not to me, no.
Okay, and he's not provided any to me either, so.
And again, even talking to the State Board of Elections, he'd go to their attorneys as well.
I'm just not sure what you could do, because the majority of the ballots in that 1995 are valid ballots.
Right.
And as you said, you can't identify the ones that were cast erroneously.
Well, it's more than 95%. Is that right?
So I just want to say, like, we can't identify, I hear what you're saying, but there is no way to match a voter to a ballot. Like, we
Right.
cast secret ballots in Georgia.
And we don't
So-
want that.
So even if we look at those 1995 ballots, they don't correlate to a specific person. Also, we don't know how many people may have actually gone to the poll manager and said, hey, I don't have this on my ballot, and actually gotten it recoded. So I think that the 157 max number gives us a really quantifiable amount to be looking at. So if we see that margin of discrepancy, or if a candidate sees that margin of discrepancy, then we have grounds to research further, or they have grounds to go to a judge and ask for whatever they want. Does that make sense? Like, as a board, there's very little that we can do to affect change backwards.
And we're talking about the margins based on the more detailed slide that we saw.
Right.
Right, if we go
The
back to that.
breakout, not just the total 157, we're talking about for a specific,
Right, Janine was
could
able to
you put that
identify
up
each
again?
race. So like if there was only 7 votes difference, you know, the net of, if you look at East Cobb missing versus East Cobb added, you know, if you net any of these things out, then that's your margin.
All these wrong.
Or
things.
wrong
There
US
is
Congress
because
district,
of
there's
the
56. I'm assuming you can drill down and know which
district.
districts those are.
So.
If we
a lot
get
of that
questioned,
would be
that's where we're
saved
gonna have to come
or
up with this
taken care
data,
of.
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
When those margins get close to these numbers for those specific candidate races. So it's not even 157 total, it's like 56, or probably even less than that if we're talking, I don't know how many US congressional districts that incorporates.
Yeah, that's.
Well, or another way to put it is the Lost Mountain question, there are 14. So if the margin is greater than 14, then this has no impact.
Exactly, which is why I think when this is excellent quantification of what we actually
Right.
had happen during those few hours on Monday morning over a 3-week span of early voting. And I just caution us to say, to do a bunch of things proactively that really then falls back on the candidate's responsibility to look at these things. We are doing the diligence to provide quantification for the error.
Right.
And I think it's the top 3 here that's going to be the most prevalent, most important.
Right, those are where some numbers
Yeah.
matter, and where there were potentially a lot of candidates.
Right.
So if we had 7 or 8 candidates, that might make that difference.
Yeah.
And that's where this quantification really matters and why it was important that we did it. But I actually believe that that's the diligence that we can do as a board. So, thank you for doing it.
Janine, I have a question about other counties that might have been affected in the same way. And,
Well, each county's database is created uniquely and separately. There were many databases that were down to the last wire.
Okay.
We were all pushing it, and I have to say publicly that even though we said that this is a programming error from either the state or the vendor, which it is, but they were under just as much pressure in this shortened time frame as we were, and so we weren't able to, fully test it. We didn't have enough time. We spot checked it and didn't see it. The vendor, didn't have time to do all what they needed to do. The state hasn't had time to do. It's really, the root cause is just the redistricting has put a time crunch on every single thing we do. And the primary is the most complex election that we do. And so it is always a challenge. And then to put redistricting right before it, that I wish everything had been perfect and that everybody had time to do everything they had to do, but I'm not surprised that there's some error.
And if we're going on the record, Gavrio did submit a letter to the legislature asking for this primary to be postponed. So I just want to be clear on the record that that was asked by all of the professionals at the state level in writing to the legislature, and that was denied.
My other question, well, really, yes, question for you. I know it's not uncommon for you to be in contact with your contemporaries in other counties. Have you heard anything similar taking place in whether it's Atlanta metro counties or even further, flung counties? Or have you heard anything like this happening in other counties? I thought that I did.
Yes.
Yes.
I've heard that DeKalb had to add a second database, and so they're conducting basically 2 elections simultaneously, side by side, because they had some either candidates or races missing, and also that Fulton had something either misdistricted or a candidate missing. Often in redistricting, there are so many districts that, a little sliver of one precinct will be in, a House district that the rest of the precinct isn't in, and that gets, forgotten or it's missed in the redistricting effort. And you usually have, 4 or 5 weeks after you do all of your redistricting to do quality assurance checks. And that did not happen this time.
How much time did you have? In normal circumstances, you said we would generally have, or you and your team would generally have 4 to 5 weeks. Approximately how much time did you have this time?
Well, we went right into qualifying the next week.
Immediately.
So we finished it on that Friday, and Monday we were qualifying candidates based on those lines. So really, the quality assurance checks happened simultaneously as the ballot preparation and the database preparation and proofing the ballot. That's when we checked redistricting, and it should have been separated,
A separate
issues.
work
Yeah.
stream, if you will.
Yes, for sure.
With regard to any communication with the Secretary of State, just again, for I'll speak for myself, my edification as well as the edification of those that are here that have joined us, could you just expound upon any communication with the Secretary of State in connection with this particular issue?
I really haven't talked to anybody over there.
Okay.
I spoke to the elections director, Mr. Evans, and asked him if he was aware of our issue that we had. And he said he was, and that he had talked to the Center for Election Systems, which is the one that is working on the technical parts and doing the databases. But I said I would like to talk to you at some point about your perception of what happened, and we haven't been able to get together.
Okay.
I think that addressed a question that I had, is how do you project might change process in the future? But this is broader than that. And
Yes.
this is a unique situation as well.
Yes. So one of the things that we discussed internally is we made the decision to finish testing the ballot marking devices and scanners using the ballot activation codes, because we were already most of the way through testing by the time we got the poll pad download. So if we had used poll pad cards to complete our testing, we would have had to start over. So we went ahead and continued using ballot activation codes. Our normal procedure would be to use the poll pad and simultaneously checking that the poll pad created the correct ballot on the ballot marking device, and that the ballot marking device ballot could be scanned. So it's the whole system. But with poll pad database coming in so late, and we were under a time crunch to complete the regular LNA testing, we just did a spot check of the poll pad and, didn't bring it full circle, which we will definitely do next time, no matter how much time we have.
I think you've addressed this before, and I might have missed it, but I had a lot of questions from people, what happens to those people that voted on Monday? Can they vote again, or do they lose out, or what's the story?
Once you've cast a ballot, you can't vote again. But if they...
That's what I thought the
Yeah,
answer was.
we did have a number of voters who questioned the ballot and went to the poll workers, and of course, the poll workers were not really understanding a lot of it in the beginning. And, in some cases, they thought, well, maybe they think they're in the city, but they're really not. So there was some confusion about, and some voters, I think, gave up trying to talk about the issue to the poll workers and went ahead and cast the ballot. But I know there were several that said, well, I'll come back. I don't think this is the right ballot. And so hopefully those that come back, obviously, will get a different ballot.
All right, so what we end up saying is, my bad, that's it.
Yeah, once you cast a ballot, you cannot cast a second one.
Right. Which begs the question, obviously that 1995, it's sequestered regardless. You've done the diligence and kind of the data quantification with respect to identifying the votes that were cast between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. to ascertain that it's likely that of that 1995, 157 are implicated in this, and then further, based upon the data quantification with regard to each particular race or the type of races. So I think at this point, unless anyone has anything further, either comments or, for that matter, questions for Ms. Evler. Because, again, we can't unring the bell. You know, we can't go back in time. I think, one, it's important, obviously, to have had this conversation, and thank you, Ms. Evler, for the work that I know that you did on Friday and over into the weekend, so that you were prepared and we were prepared to address this publicly. And so thank you and your staff for that. But unless anyone has any further comments or questions with regard to this, I don't know that there is additional information Ms. Evler can provide at this time.
I just request that you send a copy of those slides to the board.
Yes.
Okay, sure. That was the beginning of board comment, because as Ms. Evler made mention of, I did reach out to her on Friday to let her know that this was something I obviously wanted to raise during our board comment session. But is there anyone else that has board comment at this time?
All right, so the reports that you got in from the different polls on, like, a number of the polls that I went to, like Johnson Ferry Baptist, and they had set up the situation. They had said they put it in their report the last election, and on setting up the rooms, and they were saying that they didn't set it up that way, and it was slowing people down. Have you looked at the, I'm sure you've reviewed those already from this last election, because some of them were just saying, hey, this is gonna slow us down, the way they set it up. We had designed it the other way, and it had done well in April, I guess, I forget when it was, but I've got those notes that I took from them, and so I'll just give them to you. And
Yeah,
so,
that would be fine if you give them to
you
me.
know, and, because I just want to make sure, because they were a little frustrated. They're saying, hey, if this was a large crowd, we would really be slowed down. Did you get it, did any people, because you were in some of the polls that I went to, and did some of those poll managers talk to you about it?
The poll workers, the poll managers didn't really talk with me about it, because I think that they just felt if there was an oversight of their previous suggestions, that it was merely an oversight and it didn't require a major adjustment.
And I apologize for interrupting. I think for the benefit of everyone, as well as those that have joined us, when you say setup, are you talking about the physical location of
yeah,
BMDs?
room
Okay.
physical
I just want to
setup, yeah.
be certain
Understand.
that we're
I'm
all
sorry.
talking apples
Sorry.
to apples here,
Yes,
but go ahead.
Yes, there seemed to be a confidence that that was a minor oversight by someone, but that it didn't, for this particular election, create any hardship. The only other thing, and this is perhaps seemingly minor, but at Johnson Ferry, for example, there was a funeral that was being held, and in light of our discussions about our polling locations at churches, there was a real concern about where our voters should be parking. I'll just mention that. So I don't know what the remedy for that is. I don't know whether that is building into the conversation and contract a designated area with a minimum number of parking spaces, but that was the only confusion that I witnessed as a voter, actually, and as an observer. And also a situation that some of our that the poll manager at Johnson Ferry specifically mentioned. But beyond that, I have no other comment.
Anybody else?
Go right ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I know that, that they had sent on paper ballots for the next election. Did you make a response back to the party on that, or?
That's actually with me, Mr. Gartland. And when I say that, that came from a Miss Sally Grubbs. She
Right.
sent the email, and I
think
did.
it also, didn't it go to,
I believe, but yes, it went to all of us, actually.
Yeah.
And Miss Evler was on that message, but it's on me to respond to Ms. Grubbs.
Pardon?
It is on me to respond
Oh,
to
it is,
Ms.
okay.
Grubbs, yes, and I do intend to respond to Ms. Grubbs, but I did want to have an opportunity to speak in person prior to. So that's my oversight for setting
well, no, I was
wrong
just curious, 'cause
expectations.
a
But this is
lot-
obviously an open forum, and there wasn't going to be an emergency meeting held because we needed to give Ms. Eveler the opportunity to do the diligence that she needed to do. I would imagine this message will get back to Ms. Grubbs, but I'll be certain to send it to her myself via email.
Okay. And I imagine the lawyers will have to get in on that one too, right?
I don't know that the lawyer, when you say the lawyers need to get in on that one.
Yeah, because for us to do a paper ballot, I mean.
Oh, no, and that's not what I'm responding to. No,
Oh.
we're not doing a paper ballot. I mean, at this point, you can't.
I think it was requested, okay.
I understand
just-
it was requested, but you can't start a vote in the absence
That's the
of.
one thing I found. in here.
Exactly, you
Good,
can't
okay.
start the election, and we don't have the time to print a sufficient number of paper ballots. What she was asking for was an emergency meeting to discuss that, and that's what I was addressing.
okay,
With
I'm sorry.
respect to whether an emergency meeting could have been held. And beyond that, the matter was resolved, as Ms. Eveler reported, within two and a half hours. So there wasn't a decision to be made. But we would not have been able to move to paper ballots on that date, on the 3rd.
I just got a number of calls, and so
I
I wanted to
understood.
respond to that.
Yep. Ms. And if you would like, you can, well, my phone number's out there, so she can reach out, or anyone can reach out if they like. Yes?
I just had a quick question. I was wondering how things were going with staffing, and if you felt like you had everybody in place, and if there was any tracking regarding people requesting to work in other counties, in adjacent counties.
We've gotten workers from other counties, and we've lost workers to other counties. So I think it pretty much is a wash from the forms that I've signed. Staffing is still a challenge. I haven't ever seen it be easy, actually, but these days it's even harder to hire people, and it's harder for us to hire people to lower paying, very hard work jobs. We still are having issues with hiring enough workers for advanced voting locations, and the poll workers, we have yet to see if that's going to be enough or not. That is constantly churning. We think we are fully staffed, and then we lose people, and then we have to bring up, replacements, and it's a constant thing until Election Day. So we won't really know until then.
It seems like you've hired a lot of people, and then they don't show. I mean-
For some of the polls, we experience that where, it's a one-day job. So they get a call for something else, or they are sick, or a kid needs help. So they don't think there's that much impact if it's just one person that
Can
doesn't show up.
And I'm sure you do this, but I'm just asking, do you do a reserve list of,
Yes.
so when people don't show, then the poll manager can call the night before and give it a shot to
Yeah,
try
we-
and get them?
Yes, we have what we call our standby list, and we have people that attend training, and they are hired as a standby. In other words, if they don't work, they're just gonna get paid for training. So they're on the list, and usually by the time we get to Election Day, we have exhausted that list, and we still need people. But we're always trying to replenish the standbys as well until training is over, and then, we can't have people that are untrained go to the polls.
Can we expand our standby?
Well, It's
Is there
everybody that
by
will.
law, or is that by law that you can only have so many standbys?
No,
or-
no,
okay.
we get people that agree to be a standby, we'll put them in there, but most of the time, they end up working.
So you're saying our critical need is during the advanced voting, when we need a
Yes.
3-week commitment.
Yes, and we don't need
We
the
need
full
a-
3 weeks, and we don't need every day of
Okay.
every week, but
Okay.
we need people that will be worth spending the time to train them. So we don't need just 1 or 2 days, you know, we
Okay.
need a significant number of days so that it's worth keeping that person on the list. But I've, for many years, tried to get to the point where we could have 2 shifts of people. So we aren't working people 12 or 14 hours a day, and we can never seem to get to that point. So then we burn out the people that we do get because they're working 12 or 14 hours a day for 3 weeks. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I never can quite get to the point where we can resolve the overwork because we don't have enough people to do that.
How are we, I mean, obviously, we have a staple of, you know, consistent, tried and true poll workers, and we're very grateful for them. With regard to attracting new poll workers, recruiting new poll workers, I know surrounding counties are, you know, looking at having kind of job fairs, for lack of a better way of putting it. Are we looking at doing any type of non-traditional recruitment, or what's not been standard with respect to recruitment of potential poll workers?
We do have a poll worker recruiter position, and she has participated in some recruiting job fairs in conjunction with other counties. And we do have contacts with the local high schools and universities to try and find younger people. You know, we're trying.
Okay. Anything further in board comment? Nope. Okay. If there's nothing else, we have a number of meetings during the balance of this month. May 18th, we'll have our May 3 p.m. meeting, and then obviously on May the 24th, we will observe the returns of the election, and then May 31st, another meeting at 3 p.m. Mr. White is not here, so we won't be going into an executive session, Mr. White being the board's attorney. So at that point, we'll adjourn the meeting at 4:25. Thank you, everyone, for your presence today.